Hey guys, my name is Rye. Today I wanted to walk through how I did my plus 14 Priory on my 657 Brewmaster. I don't yet have tier on this character, so I don't have a quick power spike that we were able to get from this tier. However, I'm more geared for my last video. I think this is a really challenging tank key. I'm going to show you the approaches that I did, as opposed to some of the approaches I might have taken on my Vengeance Demon Hunter and timing this key. I am playing with the Disc Priest, not a Resto Druid, not a Mistweaver, so I don't have a ton of tank healing. So I'm going to show you guys at the end of the video the healing breakdown and the things that I did to ensure success in this key. In this first pull, I do pull the mini boss, which means I'm going to be keg smashing the first pull, Tiger's Lusting, and getting up here to pull the Knights and as well one of the side packs here with the Footmen and the Archers into the mini boss. I do make one mistake there and kind of panic and don't get a lot of threat on the middle pack, which is going to cost me a second, but we do get stabilized here as I press 4 Brew into the pack. I do get Blessing to Sack, but I'm not in communication with my Ret Paladin or my Shaman here, so I'm just kind of free sending what I have available to me. You'll see that every time one of these thunderclaps go out, and I'm watching the timer kind of carefully, I'm making sure that I'm kind of close to full health by either using Expel Harm, pressing a Celestial Brew, then right after the hit lands, I'm making sure I Purify. Right after I Purify is going to give me a ton of self-healing and self-sustain on this pull. All I really have right now on me is Atonement Healing, maybe some Entropic Rift from the Disc Priest, and I'm making sure I'm using my stops like my Leg Sweep and my Ring of Peace on the trash on the defense. Brew has a very easy time on this pull, and I'd recommend if you haven't done this pull before, giving it a try. It's actually pretty easy to survive all of this upcoming damage and upfront and cooldowns. You're going to be in Lust, and it saves you a ton of time killing this mini boss in the first pull as opposed to doing the 2 Knights. Once all the trash is dead and your team should ideally focus the Knight first, you're just going to be left with this mini boss, which is really easy to handle in Brew. As compared to other tanks, Brew can stagger initially the big hits, just hit Purify after, and kind of stabilize really quickly. The second pull I like to do in here is I go and pull some Footmen off to the side, and I pull these into the mini boss. In an ideal world, I actually pull 4 more Footmen from up the stairs to the right, but I did forget them as I was thinking about the new route that I made for Brew. On my VDH, I pull a couple more Sharpshooters, and because I don't have Sigil of Chains like I normally would in this key on my VDH, I do things a little bit differently on Brew. When I learned to play Brew in a season that VDH was meta, I had to make a lot of alternate routing paths for myself, and so this is the pull that I elected. There's 1 kick, there's some defense from Footmen, and 1 Sharpshooter. Ideally here, you don't have too much damage on Brew, and you should be able to sustain yourself pretty easy. Kind of your prerogative here is making sure that you kick or stop the greater heal on the priest. Otherwise, you're just going to be cleaving down the rest of the mobs. The more mobs you have on Brew, the easier it is for you to be able to sustain yourself. As you can see, as compared to my last video, I did drop Special or Rushing Jadewind for special delivery. I took some of the feedback in the comments as I hadn't played Brew in a while, and I noticed my damage definitely did go up. I'm using a lot more spinning crane kick as well, but I still am trying to get out of that dragonflight habit of, slamming spinning crane kick on uncapped pulls, as I am struggling with threat a little bit still. I feel like Brew's in such a weird place with threat right now where, it could be really good if they just upped our damage, but I feel like there's just something wrong with the keg smash modifiers compared to how it used to be. I'm still having a ton of fun with the spec. It just kind of feels a little frustrating sometimes that on Gather I can't really grip everything together and let it rip. Having to use Exploding Keg offensively for threat feels very bad right now, and I wish I could alternate that a little bit. As you can see on this pull, we're kind of stable. However, there's a bunch of casters, and I've just chained in a bunch of casters as well. I noticed that my team was getting hit by the lunges from the mini boss, so it did put a little bit of a dampen on our pacing here. That's alright, I'm making sure that I can kick and stop these adds where I can. In these packs, if you can't hit the mini boss, just make sure you're kicking, using paralysis, leg sweep, entering a piece on these conjurers and mages, and you should be more than fine. If you do happen to get rooted, remember Tiger's Lust can free you from the roots and make sure you don't get that nasty dot. The pat's pretty bad here, so I do decide to para rapid as I won't need it on this pack up to the side. I do elect to pull the pat here before I go anywhere else, and that the reason why is if I don't right now, the pat could be bad later. I want to make sure this pat is played alone and not with a mini boss, as it does contain a knight. Anytime you are tanking this dungeon and you are playing a knight, I would recommend pulling it with as little trash as possible. The reason why I hate double knight on the first pull is it is completely possible that somebody on my team just gets completely RNG'd out and gets very frustrated and dies in Lust. Your prerogative on this pull should be slamming Tiger's Palms and Blackout combos into this knight as much as possible and controlling this pack with things like your para, your ROP, your leg sweep, and your kicks. I do forget a couple warriors in this route or defenders, so I do end up kind of freeballing my route a little bit here, which ends up being okay, but you'll see what happens is a pet runs into another pack up here, so we do have a route change. Typically, I would skip everything in this arena, run around, and fight the mini-boss, but because we forgot these mobs, I decided I'm going to fight one light spawn here, and it does let us skip one at the end. Just as we're only short about like 1 count on our route, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't short overall. But what you'll end up seeing is I make kind of a judgment call failure, and we end up being a little shorter on everything anyway. As you can see, a couple frames back, the DK spawns a pet, and we end up pulling the side pack as well. This is now double light spawns, and luckily we have Ascendance from our Shaman and Power Infusion from our Priest. This is a ton of damage on me, and we're trying to do our best here through using stops and all crowd control possible to make sure this pack dies. This was not ideal, and this was not intended, and I would not recommend ever doing this pack like this. Double light spawns together is really deadly on your team, and I would be very careful in doing this. As you can see, this whole thing kind of turns into a fiasco, but because we're kind of on it with our stops, with our kicks, we're able to recover okay. Luckily, if this had been pulled and we didn't have any big cooldowns and our Shaman didn't have Ascend, we might have been in a lot of trouble. We do get through this without any deaths, and I'm making sure that I can stay alive. When you do pull the Acolytes in this pull, they are pretty deadly on tank with some pretty heavy white hits. I would recommend that if you're doing them, be prepared and make sure you're not turning your back to them, as it's pretty easy to manage. Like, this is a pack where I recommend, like, you know, you can definitely commit some defensives too if you need to. As you can see, I did commit Fort Brew on there, and I still do have Dampen Harm for the next pull. We are finishing off the light spawn, which should be your brow target, and we're just getting kicks in the priest where we can. I drag the footman out, and my next pull in the dungeon is pulling the sharpshooter and footman on the side here into the mini boss. Fighting this mini boss alone is super inefficient and DPS hate it, and I can see why. You don't want to just be fighting one mob in Mythic Plus. This mob isn't particularly deadly, and I did intend to pull the room with this, however now our pull is just a little bit smaller as we cleared out the Acolytes. I am pulling in the defenders, and remember that if everybody's stacked in melee, these archers will jump in so you don't have to worry about them. The only thing you need to do here as a tank is maybe hit leg sweep or maybe ring a piece if you are playing Brewmaster to make sure that the defense are being interrupted on the priest. Other than that, there's nothing too complicated here and nothing too special. I'm still trying to break that spinning crane kick habit, but I'm going to gain a little bit better with it with my blackout combos, but I still think spinning crane kick kind of being like off the global, and I find like just because I have a lot of haste right now, it doesn't really affect me, but it definitely does feel better to do Tiger Spam and 5 targets. I'm still not sold though on uncapped AoE if it's really worth the Tiger Spam instead of SCK. The next pull in the dungeon is going to be 3 mobs onto a mini boss. It's going to be pretty easy as well, and then we're going to get into one of the harder parts of the dungeon, which is the first boss. I tell my team at first that I don't want to lust it, and I want to see how I fare on my Brewmaster versus this boss. This is the second time I've been on Priory, and the only 2 times I've been is a +12, which I timed, and now the 14. I originally intended this as a video to showcase timing a 13 on Brewmaster, but we ended up just going ahead and one-shotting it, so all good. One quick note on this mini boss is if you are in communication with your team, and like I said, I'm only in communication here with my healer and as well my DK. I do recommend that you let the Cinder Blast go off. The reason why I say that is it only puts a stun which is dispellable. So if you choose to pull in trash into this mini boss, you can focus kicks on you know, the conjurers or the priest if you need, as opposed to the mini boss. It's a lot more efficient just because you have an entire kick that you can just let go through and be dispelled. There's virtually no tank damage, so I'd recommend that as a nice trick if you do find yourself playing with a composition that might lack kicks. Otherwise, you could play this mini boss solo and get the count elsewhere, but I find this route to be very fast and efficient. As you can see, we don't even have Lust up, and we're going to be at about 46% count. My count in my head is really messed up now. We forgot some soldiers downstairs, we accidentally face-pulled an extra light spawn, which does mean that we're going to be a little bit short at the end. However, it does mean I just have to make up 2 mobs somewhere else, and we're going to go do that at the very end of the dungeon, and it's not going to be too much of a hassle. This boss on Brew feels pretty easy, I'm not gonna lie. Even with Disc Priest, which doesn't have a ton of tank healing supports, I do commit Dwarf on the very first one of the fight, which lets me free up the rest of my cooldowns for later, and does give me a second Dwarf. Immediately after you take the bleed hit, you should Purify right away, and as you're ticking low or you don't have a cooldown going into any of the Divine Judgments or Pierce, you should at least be popping at minimum a Celestial Brew. You can see there I commit Fort Brew for the tick itself, I Purify on the hit, and then I'm watching and waiting to see if I need to hit Celestial Brew. I'm stabilizing myself here when I need to with Vivifies and as well with my Expel Harm, and Purifying after every single tank buster on this fight. As you can see, I'm still pretty tanky and not much is really going on yet. I'm hitting Purify and all I'm taking right now is Atonement Healing. I drop a little bit here and I'm thinking about my next moves. Right now I have Black Ox Brew available and chances are I want to make sure that I can snap it if I need to get a little bit of recovery. But I am okay and I think I'm going to be alright for a couple more seconds. One thing to note is you have two options using Diffuse in this fight. You can choose to Diffuse after the Judgment hit or beforehand. If you do Diffuse the Judgment tick beforehand, it is going to allow you to take 60% reduced damage from the Judgment, as opposed to diffusing it back on the boss for increased damage taken. I did elect here, as I'm kind of testing, to diffuse the hit eventually here, and you're going to see it just kind of helps stabilize me a little bit, and I think I would have died otherwise. But otherwise, like throughout this fight, I'm just making sure that on every tank hit, I'm Purifying into CB if I need to, and then popping something big if I need. Purify, CB, and then I'm back to being stable. I'm trying to sit on Dampen for as long as possible, as I know it's like my last big cooldown before I'm kind of dry. I do have my Black Ox Brew that I'm kind of sitting on as well, just in case I need to snap anything here. But I do have Dwarf coming up in 18 seconds, which gives me a lot of autonomy on the choice that I want to do. One thing to note is despite us talking about not bloodlusting this boss, our Shaman did hit Bloodlust, which makes things more complicated for me for the next pull of the dungeon. I wanted to do a very big pull with Lust, but now we're going to probably have to break it up. As you can see here, I end up hitting a Purify right after I get hit here and managing my health a little bit. And now that I have Dwarf up, I'm going to be using it on the last bleed of the boss. As you can see, I didn't really have too many problems here on Brewmaster. I found this boss to be actually pretty easy, as you're able to stagger a lot of the tank hits right away. And even with a little bit of passive healing just from Atonement, I'm more than okay. Diffuse Magic and Dampen are going to be your lifesavers in this next area, and you're going to see here that you want to be able to use them when the Paladins are actually casting their Divine Soul. I do decide to commit to one Paladin here with Ascend, and I'll be chaining when some of the Acolytes die. My intention was to play 4 Paladins here with Lust, but everything kind of got messed up as we lusted the boss. Not lusting this pull makes it a lot harder for your healer, and I wasn't actually sure of my limits in this pull. So I decided to break this up and do a soft chain when the caster and a couple of the acolytes died. In these pulls, I would always be making sure that you're rotating your defensives appropriately. I'm always trying to make sure that I'm covered here, meaning that if I don't have some sort of slow mitigation roll in, like if I don't have my Exploding Keg, if I don't have a lot of damage out like Weapons of Order, I'm trying to make sure that I'm using Diffuse Magic, Dampen Harm, or Fort Brew on the Divine Souls. The reason why, particularly, is because the Divine Toll is actually where you're most scared. When the Divine Toll goes off, it's still going to hit you for a ton, and it's going to overlap with a lot of the white hits from these mobs. As you can see here, I'm kiting quite a bit to stay out of the Paladin's Consecrate, and as well, you can see I'm getting pretty scared as I'm about to have nothing except my Black Ox Brew. I do Exploding Keg to stabilize a little bit, I hit Purify, I hit Expel, and now I'm back to being a little bit dry. I do have Dampen Harm, and I'm trying to save that for my next gather, but if I need to at any point, I'll commit Dampen Harm to dealing with one of the overlaps from one of the Divine Tolls. My priest seems to be having an okay time. I'm in comms with him, and he tells me I can chain whenever. My idea is, let's go this priest so we're not stuck on kicks, and I'll dampen going into chain this pack. I go ahead and hit Touch of Death, I chain, and as well as I get needed to here, I can hit dampen as I want to get stable. Remember, Divine Toll goes out, I want something big here if I don't have a Celestial Brew or lots of Purifies available. My health does drop a little bit here, and I do get a little bit scared and commit my health bot a little bit earlier. The Rapali unfortunately does get hit threat on the Templar, which was my mistake, as he's not in comms with us. I did want to move the Paladin out, but we are doing alright. And now we're going to have to wait for the Paladin to get back to chain the rest of the room. Ideally, we would have blown up this priest quick, and I would have pulled the rest, but now I'm waiting a second before our Paladin gets here. Once the priest dies, I think I still do go in here because I have Weapons of Order, Exploding Keg, and only a couple seconds on Fort Brew. When I have free globals, I am stabilizing myself again with Vivify, with Expel Harm, and gain a little bit of distance if needed. I commit Fort Brew on the go there, and I'm making sure that I stabilize with the Purify and slam that Weapons of Order. Remember, I still have Dampen available, I still have Diffuse, and now I'm fighting a ton of Paladins and a ton of mobs, so I want to be making sure that I'm covered during these. I hit a Black Ox Brew just as I get a little bit scared of my Purifies, and now I'm watching to see what I'm going to need to do when I pull in the Paladins. We did hit Ascend a little bit earlier, so now our damage is still rolling, so I'm making sure to chain as much as possible as our DPS of CDs. This stretch can be pretty scary, especially if you disrespect it, so make sure that you're popping something. As you see there for that Divine Toll, I do hit Diffuse and still drop pretty low. Our Paladin does go down again, which is really unfortunate, and I'm sitting here hoping that we can actually battle res him this time instead of him releasing. One thing to note too is you have to be very cognizant and careful of the casters in these pulls. If you are kiting, it might be hard for your melee to kick, and yourself as well if you're trying to do a lot of things at once. I do try to get a para on that mob and it ends up going through. However, my DK does grip in the pack to make sure that we're okay. This pack's almost dead and we're almost off the boss. Not yet did I have too many issues. I was able to kind of stabilize just using my, naked tank coverage, which is keeping my shuffle, my Vivify procs, managing my Purifies and my Celestial Brew, and making good use of my Dampen Harm, my Fort Brew, and my Diffuse. I think a lot of Brewmasters that I've watched in the past and going back to Dragonflight are afraid to press their buttons. They think Fort Brew's a long cooldown, so they shouldn't use it, or they just kind of slam it on nothing. Making sure that you're kind of knowledgeable about what's actually magic damage and using your Diffuse appropriately is a huge benefit to your toolkit, and you're going to have a really good time doing it. This boss on tank is very easy, and because I have a DK and a Red Paladin, I'm not going to really have to do too much soaking. One trick to note is if you do bring a DK to this boss, what they can do is AMS and take up to 3 stacks of the soak. Anytime that the weapon comes out, because I have a ton of melee, I'm making sure I run to the other side of the room. Always make sure that you bait for a second before you soak because the Cascader shield. You're going to see we get the cast here, and then we go over and get in position to soak. This boss is kind of strange and does have a spell Q element and doesn't always do his Cascader shield, but make sure you're not dragging the boss back to the soak until the shields go through. This is the only way like maybe one of your DPS players or even your healer could really die if they get globaled by doing the soak and the Cascader shield. Otherwise this fight's made to be pretty easy now. Drop the hammers, run the boss across the room, and you're going to have a good time. I do wait here for the Cascader shield to see if it goes through. We wait, and it looks like we skip. Our Paladin, who's again not in Discord, goes ahead and does all 5 of the soaks with Divine Shield. That was kind of cool to see as we didn't really communicate it, but it did free us up to do this entire phase on our own. On this boss defensively, I'm not really doing anything special. The only time I need to save CDs, and if you're playing in a composition that does not have a Death Knight or a Red Paladin, or perhaps a class that could hard immune or soak, then I would recommend saving your defensive buttons for the soak itself. Tank can probably get 2, if not 3, and maybe on Brewmaster even 4 if you do have Diffuse and Dampen. I would recommend using Diffuse to soak the stacks and then maybe Dampen or Fort Brew at the end. But ultimately it is a lot of damage, and once you get past 2 you can really feel the damage on a tank spec. Even on my VDH in meta and brand I start to feel it as it's not really directly brand affected. It's not really a frailty mob, you're just kind of taking a magic hit. Again, weapons come out here, we're watching the soak, and now we're baiting for Cascader shield. Nothing too special here, but as soon as the shield goes out, we're going to be going and soaking the orbs. I know that this is a 5 stack, our Paladin doesn't have bubble, our DK does have AMS in 2, so he does go in and soak 2, and I go ahead and soak 2 as well. 2 on me with Diffuse doesn't really tickle me too much, but I know when my Diffuse drops here, I might take a spike or 2 of health, but it's not the end of the world. This is going to be our last soak of the fight. We do elect here to move the boss, wait for Cascader's shield, and go for the soak. I do get shielded and walk over here, and I'm watching to soak the orbs in the fight. It is pretty close to see that if we could soak in time before it went off, but I did decide to just soak it anyway and be safe, just in case we ended up in a situation where we didn't get the soaks off and then we just lost. It would have been very, very close for us to kill that and the soaks going off, so it would have been pretty bad for me to risk it like that. But we do end up killing the boss with a really good pace. Again, we're going up top where we're going to be fighting some paladins. Again, remember the rule that we kind of talked about earlier and what I talk about in some of my VDH videos if you watched any of those. Never take magic damage uncovered. Meaning that anytime you're fighting magic tank busters, which I would almost consider this one, make sure that you have something rolling, whether it be a big celestial brew, dampen harm, diffuse magic, or fortifying brew. On this pack, a really good trick too is always save your leg sweep for when the tolls are going off. Your team members can probably handle being casted on once or twice by the priests, so I assume you guys are going to probably kick the first couple casts, and then you might be out of kicks. If that's the case, save your leg sweep and your ROP for when those divine tolls are coming out, so it buys your team some time to not get hit during the divine toll. That's definitely the scariest time of these pulls from a healer perspective, and as well a tank, as you know, you could start losing your DPS players just by that happening. And as a tank and as a brew, you do have some tools to help prevent that. Paralysis is also a great pseudo kick, so if you need to stop something just so that it doesn't overlap with another mechanic, hitting paralysis on one of these casters can buy you a couple seconds of time. Sometimes it might be just enough for your team to get a kickback before going into the pull. I do set my ping down here, and I do pull a light spawn double paladin pack. This is a very hard pack, but I do know that we have ascendance and we do have damage from our team. I think this is probably the second hardest pull in the dungeon, as it does require your team to have a good amount of defensives and as well coordination. There's a priest and a mage in here, and I want to make sure that I ROP them in and out of the consecrates. Now that everything's kind of stacked, I dip in here to get the kick on the firebolt volley, and remember now I want to be thinking about making sure that I'm covered during those divine souls. I'm defensively a little bit weaker here, but I do have dampen harm up. I have diffuse coming up in 15, and I did just hit my Black Ox Brew. Remember, I haven't used like a paint sup really in a while. If I really need to use one, I'll probably use one on the mini boss up here, but I haven't really called for too many this key. I'll try to see if this key was logged. I think I got 4 paint sups or 5 the entire key, but a lot of it too doesn't seem like it would have been that big of a deal. I think like I probably could have gotten away with just, you know, playing with the class without an external. I actually really like Disc Priest right now, just as a healer as a whole, and I've always never minded it as Brew. I think there have been a lot of people that have said that it's just unplayable with Brewmaster, but I think Disc is excellent. Having big powered shields to kind of cover your gaps too is really nice. I do elect to pull this pack on its own, while I should have pulled the left side instead of this side. As we kind of talked about earlier in the video, my count did get a little bit scuffed, and if I decide to pull the right hand side with the paladin, we would have had count, but as you're going to see, we end up being a little bit short, which does throw us for a curveball later. We do waste an entire minute-ish on this pull and waiting for the pad to come back around, which kind of sucks, because it does tick down our timer. But we are very timer friendly here, we haven't had any hiccups, and I haven't died yet, so we're off to a pretty good pace if you ask me. Again, these pulls shouldn't be too deadly from a tank perspective. I do a pretty massive ROP here, I think. Oh, ROP was on CD. I guess it was a death grip, but I did remember those guys being kind of kicked out. What we are going to do now is wait for the pat. We do want to fight the mini boss, which is unlucky because we do have ascendance, as you can see on the left hand side of the screen. We do have some DKCDs as well. We do wait for the pat and burn another 40 seconds of time, which is completely useless in this key. To make sure that these pats, kind of where the casters come in, I do ROP them early. If you don't have a lot of range DPS in the group, I'd recommend that you can definitely use ROP in some pretty interesting ways to kind of group mobs in. The last thing that we want, right, is like maybe a knockback or something, putting those mobs into the mini boss and then wiping. We want to save Lust for the last boss, as I don't think that Brew's terribly afraid of this mini boss. But overall, we do end up able to kill this pack pretty easily, and we are going now into the mini boss. This mini boss slams, and if you haven't tanked him yet on a key above a 12, you may not understand how hard his strike hits until you actually feel it. Knowing this on VDH and knowing that I haven't been here yet on Brew, I know that for every single one of these strikes that I'm going to want a defensive. My Paladin does haphazardly use Sack on me, but I do open up with Fort Brew, and I'm watching my Celestial Brew, my Diffuse, and my Dampen. For this next hit, I take it completely natty because I'm in AMZ. AMZ is a damage reduction that works for me as well, and I want to make sure that I'm using my team's capabilities as well as my own to survive this pull. This next Blazing Strike comes out, I do hit Exploding Keg, and as well, I'm a little bit light. I am watching my Dampen and my Diffuse, which I'm going to want later in the pull. As soon as this next strike comes out, I'm going to need a bigger defensive. As you can see, I'm kind of running low on Purifies. I do Celestial Brew, and I put Diffuse Magic on to kind of weaken the hit. But as you can see, this magic damage tank buster is trucking me. I'm watching very carefully now my stagger and as well what buttons I have available. I commit Dampen Harm and as well my Vivify procs when I can to get stable, but now I'm kind of running on fumes. I have one more Celestial Brew that I can commit on this last strike, and as well I have my Black Ox Brew if needed. I immediately Black Ox Brew and start queuing the Spinning Crane Kick to gather some Ox Orbs, and I still have it ticking on me into this pull. I wait to pull the other side until that debuff falls off of me because it's very deadly. That Blazing Stripe absolutely fucks, and I would not disrespect it by any means. I did get a little unlucky here as I didn't have a Exploding Keg for the pull, but that's okay as we were able to stabilize. Kind of thematic from my other Priory video, which I just posted on my Preservation Evoker, it's kind of funny that we both end up in the exact same position in this dungeon where we forget a little bit of count. Because we have Lust and we just hit Ascendance, I say that we should do the boss first so that we can hit Ascendance in phase 2 with Lust, and then we'll go finish up the trash after. But as you're going to see, I'm missing one mob from all of the little blunders from the start of the dungeon. This trash shouldn't be too deadly, but one thing to note is once the mobs, the footmen, are about to die, if you do stun them with Leg Sweep, Capacitor Totem, or anything else, they will not explode. Meaning that, you know, if I played a little bit better there, I probably could have saved Leg Sweep for when they were going to explode, hit stun on them all, and then we would have taken no damage, but, you know, alas. I know that at this point I've done everything challenging in here on a tank. I don't really have too much to do on this boss as a Brewmaster to really help my team. One thing I can do during the phase is make sure I have a Ring of Peace set up to kind of CC some of the ads. And other than that, I'm pretty much just killing myself where I can, hitting Purify, hitting Celestial Brew, and trying to do whatever damage I can to the boss. Having played a lot more Brew this week, and now timed a couple 14 keys. This is actually my second 14 I timed. And as well, I had a chance to get some actual gear. I'm really liking the spec again. I really enjoyed the comments and the feedback I got from my rookery video from seeing some Brewmasters kind of chime in, saying welcome back, happy to have you aboard, and as well kind of criticizing me and grinding me the gears a little bit for some of my misplays. But remember again, I haven't played Brew in a long time, and this is my first time kind of back playing the spec since, you know, Season 3 of Dragonflight, where I played a little bit in Season 4 and ended up quitting due to a VDH season. I think Brew's a blast, and as I kind of like theorycraft a little bit more, I'll probably be altering my playstyle and hopefully getting a little bit better, but it did feel really good to be able to time this key on a 14. I think one thing to note too, and one thing that I've kind of seen a common struggle with is I think there are a lot of Brewmasters that are copying VDH routes, and one thing to note and why I think I like this spec so much, and when you're playing a tank that isn't like the meta tank, which everybody's used to, it's perfectly okay to like alternate the route a little bit and kind of suit it to whatever needs you have. If you look back, way back in my channel, I have a video of how I did 29 Everbloom in Season 3. And I was the only Brewmaster in the world to do it. And for a long time, I think my friends and I were all convinced that you really just couldn't do that dungeon without Silent Sigil and that key level. And with some like kind of clever engineering, a little bit of trial and error, we were able to pull it off. And it was probably one of my favorite memories of playing Brew and like even playing Mythic Plus. But being clever and being creative and like doing things a little bit different isn't always necessarily bad. But remember, as a tank, even as a Brewmaster, if you do feel like you're off meta, which I think we still are right now, make sure that you're still pulling around DPS CDs, right? If you do a 3 mob pull while you have Shaman Ascendance, or you have Incarnation, or you know, you have TK CDs or Pillar or Shaman CDs or whatever else, it's not going to feel very good and you're going to slow down your dungeon quite a bit. You should understand what classes do what, how you can handle that in your toolkit. And remember too, like even the issue of threat, making sure that you don't exploding cake late into a pack if you know your shaman's about to ascend, or if there's a pack that requires like a lot of multi-dotting like this first pull in this dungeon. Take a little bit of extra time, take a couple extra globals, blackout kick, keg smash, maybe throw a tiger's palm or a breath of fire on some mobs to get a little bit of threat. As this boss is kind of at 20%, we kind of have to go down and start figuring out what we're gonna do for our last trash pack. Unfortunately, we still need 0.73 in the dungeon. We need 7 count, which is not enough with just one priest or one conjurer. So we do decide to go and cleave them down and blow them both up. We do have plenty of time left in this dungeon, and it's more than alright, so we do manage to clear out the end of this dungeon pretty okay. Remember, I slow rolled a lot of this dungeon too, because we had some pretty good DPS. However, at the same time, I took it at a pace which I thought was going to be me being able to live. Turns out that wasn't really a concern, as even playing a little bit more aggressively in the middle area and at the start, it kind of paid off and let us buy some time to be able to pull things nice and steady at the end. If you do make a error in your routes, don't be like me, don't try to just like freeform. Take the 15 seconds and make sure that you get the appropriate count where you can. If you watched my other video, the one I did with Yoda, we actually ended up not having enough percent at all at the end and having to go back to the start to clear out the trash. With that in mind, this is the way that this key ended, nice in time, and I had a ton of fun doing it. Future videos, hopefully I have a little bit more gear. Hopefully on the reset I get some tier, and hopefully too that I get a little bit more crit verse, a little bit less haste, and probably have a good time. As you can see, I got my achievement here for my Keystone Resilience, and we did get a little bit of score on some of our team members. Thanks for all the love, thanks for all the support, and thanks for all the comments in the last video. Really enjoying Brew right now, and hopefully you guys are too. Let me know in the comments what you think I kind of missed this time, what you think I'd like to see in future videos, and feel free to come check out my Discord where, a bunch of us are chatting, and if you have any questions about my routes or anything else, I have them all posted in there. Until next time, I'll catch you guys in the next one.